There are so many mechanics and items in Fortnite that have just been forgotten about, straight up removed without notice, and just underutilized in the time that they existed. And today I would like to go back and revisit 10 items and mechanics that Fortnite removed from the game that fundamentally change how you play BR. I think a good place to start would be cars. Ever since Chapter 5, the cars have been narrowed down to two types: the Trail Smasher and the Whiplash. We've lost out on some of the more unique cars like the Taxi, the regular car, I guess you could call it, and the truck. Honestly, all of those old cars came back in Chapter 2 Remix, and they are just as balanced as the day that they released. And it's unfortunate that Fortnite had to remove regular cars, because part of the balance of cars was that not all of them were whiplashes, not all of them had boosts, and you would want to use each car for its uniqueness. Like, regular cars have a four-seater, right, which you would use to move a whole squad. Trucks have a four-seater, but they have an exposed backside, but you also get off-terrain functionality. And I think a lot of these old cars, had a really unique fit in the game that we're kind of just missing now that they're removed. But speaking of missing, animals in Fortnite just disappeared after Chapter 4. We originally had boars, wolves, and chickens in the game, and later that was expanded to a couple of other animals. They became rideable, and you were able to tame them by feeding them like animal meat or putting on a hunter's cloak. But animals were a thing that you would notice subtly in every game. It's not like they changed the entire battle royale and how you played it, but sometimes you might hop on a boar and use that to rotate into the circle, and now it kind of feels a little bit empty when you're walking around in the wilds. There's no creatures wandering around and no chickens or anything like that. And some of the animals were pretty cool functionally. The wolves you used to be able to tame and kind of like use as a NPC of sorts, like you can do with hireable NPCs. It just feels a little bit less wild in Fortnite nowadays. And speaking of animals, we can't forget our friends under the sea. Fortnite used to have a fishing book. Interestingly enough, you used to be able to go and collect different types of fish in different biomes. There was like green floppers in one biome, blue floppers in the other, orange in like every biome, and you used to have to get a pro fishing rod in order to get some of these fish, and you basically would fill out this fishing collection book. And it's kind of a mechanic that Fortnite was just not too keen on. It really was only in like Chapter 2 Season 4, and then it kind of got slimmed down until it disappeared. But honestly, it's such a unimpactful mechanic, and pro fishing rods are pretty funny. Honestly, when you think about it, I mean, like a blue rarity fishing rod is pretty interesting. That honestly, it wouldn't hurt to bring back. It wouldn't impact anything too crazy. It'd just give you a little something else to do when you're playing Battle Royale. Maybe you can catch a gold flopper, I don't know. But on the other side of that spectrum, there were some mechanics that were extremely impactful on this list. And I think primarily one of them was the reality trees. You used to be able to grow a reality sapling, and I believe that this was in both Chapter 3 Season 3 and Chapter 3 Season 4, and basically you would pop open these bulbs and these seeds would kind of float down. You'd pick one up and you would throw it down, and it would start out as a little tiny sapling and then kind of grow into this miniature tree that had progressively better and better loot as you went on tending to it, as your matches went on. And honestly, this was kind of game breaking, because you would go somewhere that had one of these tree seed pods, and you would just go and loot everybody's trees, and you'd get like 10, 20 gold items, bunch of purple stuff, because each one of these trees could have like 3 purple bulbs, 2 gold bulbs, and there's also the potential for mythic bulbs, but those are only available to the player who planted the seed. So it was very, very interesting, and we've never seen mythics obtained in this way, and it honestly made them extremely limited. The other interesting thing that I think a lot of people forget is that the mythics were actually based on what biome you had planted the reality tree in. I think you would get like the mythic hammer in the mountain biome, you'd get the mythic sniper, like in the desert or something. But it was a pretty interesting mechanic, and this is one of the more understandable ones that they would remove, because honestly, I mean, does it really fit in to every season have a reality sapling? I don't think so, but it was just so game changing for those 2 seasons it was in. I kind of had to mention it on this list. And speaking of game changing, we have another crazy one here, tents. Almost all of chapter 3 we had tents. I believe they were moved in chapter 3 season 4, but for most of chapter 3 we had tents, which was kind of crazy. You could have 10 like copies of the mythic MK7 in a match if everybody in your squad had put a mythic MK7 into their tent, which is just nuts. I mean, really think about that. Having multiple mythics in one match is crazy. I think it's one of the more interesting mechanics, but I also don't think it's that terrible, because it gives everybody a chance to use mythics. I mean, like, if you're not that great, if you don't want to fight the boss every time, you could just have a mythic, and if you survive long enough to, deposit it back, you could deposit it back. I don't think that they were crazy. The only negative to it is, you had people spawning off rip and, picking up 2-3 mythics and then just killing everybody. But besides that, they were honestly relatively balanced, and I don't see a reason why Fortnite can't bring them back. And at least we know that they were gone, unlike this other change, fire. Now this is a pretty interesting one. Fire used to spread to wood builds, it used to spread to stone builds. It wouldn't destroy stone builds, but fire used to actually be a pretty impactful mechanic. It actually started out really, really weak though. It would only do like 1 damage to you if you were in like a burning box, and it was honestly kind of pointless. You'd be able to use like the flare gun and firefly jars to start it, and it was kind of just this niche mechanic. That was until chapter 2 season 6, where they did a fire themed wild week and buffed fire like crazily. Now it does like 15-16 damage every tick of fire, so it was actually worth using. And for a while it went on like that, but then I think somewhere around chapter 4 they just turned off fire spreading, and it has been the same since. In fact, in our current season, chapter 6 season 4, fire spreading is off, and when you use the flare gun, it really doesn't have any kind of offensive capability because they've taken away that fire spreading. So it's really not as good as it used to be. It's just a recon item. It's nothing more, nothing less anymore, which is really unfortunate. Another thing that was kind of randomly removed was physics items. In chapter 3, we had a ton of physics items. We had rocks, we had trees. I think there were a couple of other little things that you might have noticed around the map. But after chapter 3, I think we had a couple more of those trees, but the physics items started to disappear, and then in chapter 5 we had nothing at all physics related in the entire BR map, which honestly, they changed the game a little bit because it was pretty interesting to PvP around them because they could knock down builds. They were fun to cross water with, but it's just these little things that you pick up on when you're playing BR that kind of disappeared, and it makes the game feel like it has a little bit less depth. You get used to a mechanic and then it just disappears, and it kind of feels less in a way. But I get it, you can't have feature creep, right? Eventually there would be too much stuff in the game all at once. And speaking of too much stuff, toolboxes and crafting was a lot. Basically, you would have your baseline loot pool and then be able to side grade a lot of the weapons into completely different weapons, completely separate from the loot pool via nuts and bolts. You can make a pump shotgun into, I believe, a charge. You can make a regular SMG into a rapid fire SMG. all sorts of stuff like that. And you could also get cow catchers, which were nice in zero build, and a bunch of other fun things from these toolboxes, but they were randomly removed during Chapter 4, and we haven't seen them since. They kind of returned as car attachments in Chapter 5, Season 3, but we all know how that went, so I don't think we'll be seeing car attachments or cow catchers anytime soon. And I've saved two interesting ones for last. I think the last one is really interesting, but I'm going to take a little break and just remind you to like and subscribe to the video. If you've made it this far in, then potentially you'll enjoy future and past content of mine. Go ahead, give a look at that later, and yeah, if you could just subscribe, it helps me out a little bit. But number 2 on my list, build holds. They're pretty recent. They were Chapter 5 edition, and they were only in for, I believe, 2 or 3 seasons before they got removed. Build holds was a way for you to scale walls. You would basically walk up to a wall and just hold space, and it would crawl you up the entire thing. Now, as a mainly zero build player, this was great for me because when I was playing builds, I could basically just scale up your build on top of you, and, you know, wait for you to add it up and shotgun you. It was also extremely unfair to build players because you could lose height way too easily with this mechanic. So honestly, it's good that it got removed, but it fundamentally changed how you would play build mode. So it really is one of those more interesting mechanics. And finally, we have one that honestly is very sad that we lost: the key mechanic. Keys were introduced in Chapter 3, Season 3, and you were able to unlock vaults, you were able to unlock these weapon cases, all for these keys, and you'd get keys, at least in Chapter 3, by looting chests. They would randomly come out. They were a gray item. Now, as far as how rare they were, I honestly can't remember, but they were decently rare, and you would need like 2 or 3 keys to open a vault. The other thing to note about keys is when they were added to Chapter 4, there were augments and hollow chests added for keys, and you could go to a hollow chest and get an exotic for 2 keys. So it was a really interesting way to obtain exotics and gold and purple loot. And honestly, it's a mechanic that I would love if they brought back to Fortnite, because it's one of those more interesting things. And it would add a lot to the gameplay if you were looting and you found a key, and then you're like, oh, well, you know what? There's a vault at this POI, I can go to the vault. It just would make the game that much more interesting. But I think that's what a lot of these mechanics that we went over would do. Any one of these little mechanics, while they're not something that, you know, truly ruins or breaks the game, they're all little things that kind of added to the Battle Royale, and it's kind of interesting to look back and see what got added, what got removed. I mean, there's some other stuff that I didn't even put on this list, like upgrade benches, you know, the live llamas that you used to have to kill, weather, but I think it was interesting to just narrow it down to 10. But remember, guys, to like the video and subscribe to the channel for some more, you know, Fortnite type content. I have a couple more videos in the pipeline, so I'm hoping I could see you again soon, and it was a pleasure talking to you. Have a good one. Bye.